Hey everyone, welcome back to bageltcg. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a predictive tier list for the classic constructed meta with outsiders. That meta starts on Monday, which is in just a few days from now, I think 5 or 6 days from now, and I'm really excited to talk about what I think is going to be coming with this meta, the kind of new cards we've gotten from the new set, how it's going to affect all the heroes. It's going to be maybe a little bit of a longer tier list, but a little bit more just about my thoughts with the meta and how it's going to evolve. So before we hop into that, I want to give a shout out to my patrons. Subscribing to my Patreon gets you access to stuff like a complete draft tier list, these regularly updated Patreon deck lists that I update, you can see pretty regularly here as the meta changes and what updates I need to be made to them. Some of them have even more complicated full written out guides in the notes section as well. So you get access to all of that. I also want to ask you to subscribe. Only about 25% of you that are watching are subscribed. So I really appreciate if you can click that button. But let's hop right into the video here. And this, you can see, usually I drag each of the heroes into their spot, make it suspenseful. Now, from now on, I'm just showing you the tier list and then we're going to talk about it, right? I feel like it's kind of, I clickbait a lot and I love clickbait stuff. I think it's hilarious, but it feels extra clickbaity to make you click all the way to the end of the video just to see the completed tier list. So we're just going to throw it at the front here, and then I'll actually just talk through my thoughts of the tier list, right? Because just looking at the tier list, especially in Flesh and Blood, gives you almost no information. You can look at this and see it say, oh, I should play Oldhim or Icelander, but you won't know why you should play them, what their matchups are, any of that stuff, right? So you can click at the beginning and just click off, but you're really not going to be any more prepared than you would have without looking at the tier list. But let's hop into it, right? So some context is the 3 strongest heroes that have been really just shaping the metagame are these 2 ice heroes and then Dromai, right? For a long time, Illusionist has had a pretty strong hold on the meta, and for almost an equally long time, the disruptive ice decks have as well, right? So Icelander has won a lot of the major events, especially on the back of Michael Hamilton, and then Oldhim has won even more events, just by being probably the strongest hero, especially for people that aren't maybe as practiced. But even for very practiced, experienced players like Michael Fang, Oldhim can be just so powerful. And then to counter them is Dromai, right? Dromai has always been, Illusionist especially, has always been the answer to ice. Prism had almost an unlosable matchup into these 2 heroes right here. These heroes were, if you remember, not played at all basically before Prism hit Living Legend. Almost no play from either of these heroes. They were pretty bad. They couldn't beat Prism, and she was always 25% of the meta, and you just can't lose 1 out of 4 every 4 games. You just aren't going to win an event like that. So Illusionist has always been good into them, and Dromai is the same scenario. She is really good into those decks. You have to be able to go wide to beat an Illusionist. You have to be able to do multiple attacks. So especially against Dromai, you need to be able to hit all the dragons. But even against Prism, you had to be able to throw out multiple attacks and then end with a cheap attack clearing the aura, right? It hasn't really changed. It's maybe changed a little where you need to go even wider now. But it's still it's pretty important to be able to go and clear a bunch of dragons out, right? And these 2 heroes just can't go wide like that. They can't do it. They can go 2 wide maximum probably, and it's just not that possible for them. So that's where we get then the aggro decks. You can see these other 3 aggro decks here in A tier that kind of prey on Dromai, right? These 3 decks are all gonna have maybe a bit of a tough time into these 2 ice decks that really beat up kind of everything that isn't Dromai, but they're gonna definitely beat Dromai and then beat a lot of the rest of the field, right? So that's kind of the rock, paper, scissors we've been having. Obviously, it's a bit more of a complicated rock, paper, scissors because it's not like scissors is just 1 aggro deck. It's 3 aggro decks, and they have each a different style, and you need to sideboard differently for each one. So it's a very complicated rock, paper, scissors, right? Paper, obviously, is just 1 hero. But you can see it's a little more complex. And then all of these B tier heroes are actually pretty viable. Flesh and Blood is really about hero mastery, and I could probably see any of these heroes in B tier win an event. I could see any of them. Reinar won Calling San Jose a while back, and I just don't think he should have won any event based on his power level. So like you can be proven wrong. Dash just won Auckland like a month or two ago, and I think she's in B tier. I don't think her winning an event pulls her out of B tier. It just means some people are really good on their heroes and maybe get some good matchups throughout the day, don't hit a lot of their bad matchups, right? So there's a lot of factors here, and just because a hero is an A tier or S tier or B tier or C tier doesn't mean they can't win an event. But let's look at just that context I was talking about here. You can see, especially Oldham is kind of to a lesser extent, but especially Dromai and Icelander are kind of the paper and rock of the format for a while, right? Icelander was 16 players here. Dromai had 18. And then Briar was kind of the default aggro deck. I do think Lexi and Katsu both got a ton of tools in Outsiders, and I don't think Briar is going to be the best solo aggro deck anymore. I think she's got some huge competitors. Fi was also a pretty good aggro deck. I don't think he got a ton of tools, especially compared to Katsu, who I think got some absolutely busted tools. And so I think Fi is still strong, but I don't think he'll be as strong as Briar, Katsu, or Lexi. And then we've got some of the Guardians with Bravo and Oldham. They're in that category of rock with Icelander. And then Dash is actually, funnily enough, kind of an aggro deck and a Dromai style deck too, right? She can set up a lot like Dromai. She's the like bad version of Illusionist and then bad version of aggro. But that's kind of what we were looking at, right? We were looking at a bunch of Dromai and a bunch of Icelander and a bunch of Oldham too. You can see, had quite a few Oldham in. Was it just one? Oh my God, there was one Oldham actually in top 8 here, but ended up winning the event. But this was a pretty diverse one. We also had a Bravo, so another Guardian. We had 2 Dromai, 2 Icelander, and then we had the 1 Dorinthea and the 1 Dash here. But we had this spread, and they've kind of had a bit of a chokehold on the meta, especially at least in my opinion, Icelander and Dromai, because it's really hard. Every time I build a deck, it's really hard to beat both of them. Like, it's almost impossible to beat both of them. And if you can beat both of them pretty consistently, you're probably in a pretty okay spot, right? Like, beating Icelander means you have to have either a way to put a bunch of permanents out, like Dromai, or you have to have like a bunch of extra resources. Like maybe Bravo has an okay matchup because he's got all these blues. To beat Dromai, you need to have a bunch of ways to go again, right? So you need to be like a Katsu, a Briar, but Katsu and Briar can't beat Icelander that well because she has all this disruption. So it's really hard to beat both of them. And that's kind of what I've been trying to build my decks around lately, seeing if I can beat both Icelander and Dromai. And I'll tell you, it is not easy. It is not an easy task. And if you're in C tier, it probably means you maybe lose to both. Like B tier heroes, I think all can beat one or the other. Like if you're in B tier, you can maybe beat either Icelander or Dromai pretty consistently. If you're in C tier, you probably cannot beat Icelander or Dromai consistently, and they're like half the meta, right? Like we saw 16 and 18. They're a decent amount of the meta, like 40% of the meta, and if you can't beat that, that's a bit of a problem. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this tier list. You might have noticed the new heroes, most of them aren't doing great. So Riptide's down here in C tier. Azuri is also in C tier, and then Arachne, who I guess isn't technically new, is in C tier. The Assassins just are struggling. Like, the Assassins aren't in a great spot. They don't really beat Icelander or Dromai. They don't have a lot of go again right now. At least class go again. Obviously, you can play like Scar for Scar and Ravenous Ravel, but anyone can play those cards, right? Like, you need to have like good class go again, really. And they don't have a ton of that. And then Ranger struggles really hard into both of those. And unless you have a way to get go again on Ranger, which basically the only way is Voltaire, which means only Lexi has access to that. Riptide doesn't, and he's going to get kind of slaughtered for the most part, at least from the builds I've seen, right? Like, I could be proven wrong on all this. It is a speculative tier list. But all the builds I've seen, Ranger and these Assassin decks, they're just getting kind of torn apart by Icelander, these Ice decks, and the Illusionist, right? So not looking amazing for them. And so they're in C tier for now. They're hanging out with the bad Monarch heroes, the Brutes that haven't gotten support in what feels like forever. They got a little bit of support in Dynasty, but it certainly was not enough support. So the Brutes kind of hanging out down here. And then Bolton, who has the charge mechanic. and it's the charge mechanic. It's not doing great. So that's kind of how we got C tier, right? Looking in B tier, I actually think Dorinthea might be our 5th A tier. I kind of actually tried to rank these in terms of power level. I usually don't, but this time I didn't really with C tier. But with S, A, and B tier, I tried to do that if I could. And I do think she's the closest to A tier. Getting the new card Burdens of the Past. Burdens of the Past, this card is pretty huge for her. It's a 3-block blue, so she's already pretty happy with that. But the main thing is it says, until the end of turn, target hero can't play defense reactions with the same name as a card in their graveyard, right? And she always had this problem where she would just run out of threats and could not close the game against especially Guardians or any of these blockout decks. And now it's just like, oh, I get my go off turn and you can't de-react it, right? She plays this, and if they already have that Sink Below and that Fate Foreseen in their graveyard, if they've already got that Staunch or that Unmovable, so like late game you play this, and they can't play any of those cards, and you're like guaranteed to get that Seal Blade Supremacy hit, get that Glistening Steel Blade hit. It just makes it so much stronger. I think this is probably one of the most impactful cards of the set, even though it's really only impacting one hero right now, because you don't play a ton of D-Reacts into most heroes, and you're almost never going to get the second line off. If there's 10 or more D-Reacts, draw a card. Very few classes play 10 D-Reacts. Riptide might be like the only one. And then some Guardians, maybe Dash, but very few decks are ever going to have 10 D-Reacts in their graveyard. That's pretty rare, but as long as they have one of it with the name, you should be fine for the top part. So you don't really care that much about drawing the card with Dory. This is just going to be a huge card, and the fact that it's just a blue 3-block otherwise makes it really impactful for her. So she was already really good into the aggro decks. She was already pretty happy into everything in A tier for the most part. She just wasn't that happy into this guy right here. Oldhim was a bit of a nightmare for her, and I think that matchup is a little bit easier now because of that card right there, Burdens of the Past. Bravo and Dash didn't really get anything. Fi maybe got a few ninja cards, but nothing really impactful. The main thing that Rune Blades got is Premeditate, which is also called Ponder Run, as people are calling it. It's just Plunder Run, but slightly weaker, a little nerfed version of Plunder Run. But Plunder Run was still bannable, right? It was still busted. It's a non-attack. It's just better Nimbleism most of the time. It's Nimbleism that gives you a Ponder token on hit. This card's insane. The Rune Blades are going to be very happy to have it, and they're probably going to use it best. Probably the Rune Blades and Rangers, right? Rune Blades and Rangers are likely going to use this best, and so card is really good. And then Give and Take is a really good way to get around any kind of fatigue, and it's just not a bad card in general, right? Every time they block with a card on it, you get to put a card from your graveyard on top of your deck. If you pump this with like that Premeditate with Briar and you attack with it, and they say they block 6, you get to put 2 cards from your graveyard on top, and you can put that Channel Mount Heroic and an Earth Blue right on top, and you just got to do it again, like do that next turn. Super strong. You do kind of need to make them block it, but you can even loop Give and Takes at the end of the game, which is how you kind of beat fatigue. So this card plus Premeditate, both majestic generics and both pretty impactful, I think specifically for the Rune Blades, because especially Give and Take even having the built-in Go Again. Obviously, the rate is weaker than Leg Tap, but the fact that it blocks 3 and has a nice effect makes it feel pretty worth it to me, and you can then do like 2 cards with Rosetta here to try to do that thing. So pretty strong card, and I think the Rune Blades are probably going to play 2 or 3 copies of Give and Take and definitely 3 copies of Premeditate. So that's making Viserai pretty strong. Kano, I think, is always going to be a B tier dark horse. He can just blow people up. And then Azalea, obviously Ranger got some buffs here, but she still struggles to clear dragons. She doesn't get Go Again very well. She's just like a Go Tall hero. So she's still going to get kind of run over by Dromai. I think she got a better Icelander matchup because of all her inertia building stuff, but she's going to struggle into the D-Reacts from Oldhim, the build-up from Dromai. She beats the aggro decks pretty well now, but honestly, beating the aggro decks is not going to win you an event. You need to beat the Dromais, and you need to beat the ice decks, and if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to win an event. Dromai actually probably got Premeditate as a card. This is a pretty good Dromai card. Almost all of basically all of Dromai's cards are playable because they play like 50 reds. So the Ponder token is pretty good in Dromai. You're not going to hit that many blues that aren't playable. You have a pretty low chance of that. And so it's always good to draw a card with her. And then it's a red. And then you can just arsenal your attacks and it's +3. It's pretty strong. And I think Dromai will probably play this card. I don't know if she'll play Give and Take. I don't think she needs the Give and Take, but I think she will play Premeditate here. And she's just already A tier. Illusionist is such a strong class. Being able to put out permanents, especially with how fast she can, like with Dash, your permanents don't have go again. You can't like put 4 out in one turn. But Dromai can put 4 dragons out in one turn. And that's just really powerful. So she's kind of stuck in A tier, especially because of how good she is into these 2 S tier decks. I don't think she's leaving A tier anytime soon. I think the only time she'll leave A tier is when the next set comes out in July and we get a new Prism, and that's probably just going to be stronger than Dromai. I mean, there's a good chance it is. And we're getting a new Chain who's probably going to dunk on Dromai. So we'll see how that turns out, but that's pretty far away. We're not going to worry about that yet. Katsu got probably the best support of any hero from this set, and probably some of the most support any hero has gotten in a long time, right? We got these amazing cards. Bonds of Ancestry is a 0 for 4 go again. When this attacks, deal 4 extra damage. Basically, it's really busted. This is probably the strongest card in the set by far. You just attack with it after a Gust Wave, banish a card from your graveyard with combo. This has go again. It's 0 for 4. You can banish the blue Fluster Fist that's in your graveyard to grab the red Fluster Fist, and then you just get to attack for 4 after. That's one card dealing 8 damage for you with 0 resources by itself. It's just absurd. You saw Dishonor. You can see Dishonor here. Also has an absurd on hit, probably the best on hit ever printed. Just turning off your opponent's hero ability permanently. Pretty stupidly strong. Obviously, this one takes more setup because you need specifically Surging Strike, Descendant Gustwave, Bonds of Ancestry before it. But if you don't have that, you can still banish this with Bonds of Ancestry, and it's just another 0 for 4 because it still gets the top part of getting +2, and it's just another blue block 3 combo card that attacks for 2. I mean, it's great. And then the new Gust Wave is also insane. Like, this is a 0 for 5 after your Surging Strike. Costs 1 less, gets +2, and you don't even need the Surging Strike. You can play this as like a bad leg tap because it already has the go again. Just play it as a 1 for 3 go again, and then you still get your Bonds of Ancestry after, which is a 0 for 8 still, probably, which makes it still worth it, right? You're getting 1 less damage than leg tap, but then you get this 0 for 8 after it, so it's still fine. Like, these 3 cards are so strong. It's crazy. It's crazy how much like Katsu just blew past some of the aggro decks and how much damage he can output. You can just like on a hand with almost no cards. Like you just need the Surging Strike, a blue. So you need a blue to pay for the Surging Strike, and then you just need any 0 cost. It doesn't matter, like any 0 cost in your deck. Just the blue, Surging Strike, and any 0 cost. And then you have Pouncing Links. You can pop the Pouncing Links when the Surging Strike hits and activate Katsu. Pouncing Links finds your yellow Descendant Gust Wave because it has 2 or less base, and then your hero ability find Bonds. So then you have your yellow Gust Wave right here, has 2 or less. You play it after the Surging, it's a 0 for 4 now. You play Bonds that you found off your hero ability, and then you can banish the Dishonor from your graveyard. You can do the full Dishonor line off of 3 cards, and the only one that matters really is the Surging Strike, and it needs to hit. That's all you need to care about, is Surging Strike hitting. Then you can pitch the blue for the Surging Strike. That doesn't matter. You have like 20 blues. And then any of your 0 costs, and you have like 40 0 costs. So it's so easy to get off. It's kind of stupid. The deck is so strong now. It's just really, really good. Probably, I'm going to say the best aggro deck. I could be wrong there because I think Lexi is pretty strong now too. And Runeblade's got a lot of support. So all of these 3 aggro decks look strong. I'm starting with Katsu, and I've already put a ton of work into optimizing my Patreon Katsu list, so check that out. It already has like a mini guide written. I've already put like 50 to 100 games in on him. He's super strong, super good. But let's look at Lexi here because she got a bunch of good Ranger cards, especially all of these Inertia cards, right? Because she was having trouble with Icelander a little bit, right? She was struggling against Icelander, didn't love all of the disruption from Arsenal, and now she just doesn't have to worry about it. Like, you've got these arrows that just give Inertia tokens when they hit, and she got probably the strongest card from the set. I just said that for Bonds of Ancestry, but this one might be a little stronger than Bonds of Ancestry. Maybe. It's pretty close. This card's silly, right? If it's your last card in hand, you don't have to discard a card for the effect. So you just play it. You get to put any attack action from your graveyard face down into your arsenal. You don't discard a card because it was your last card in hand. And you get a ponder. So it's drawing a card. It's basically card neutral, right? Like you basically didn't have to play this card. But then it kind of drew you a second card because you get the attack action. So it's like a 0 cost draw 2 cards. And you give your opponent a frailty. What? It's like cash in that costs 0 and gives your opponent a frailty token? What? This card is silly. You're playing 3 of it always in every assassin and ranger. It's so strong. It's kind of insane. It's probably the strongest because they made it the frailty one, and frailty is probably the weakest of the tokens. It doesn't really affect like 80% of the heroes, but still, the top effect is so insane, and getting the ponder, the frailty is like icing on the cake. But this card's absurd. Lexi's really happy to have this card. And yeah, she just got a lot stronger with all the ranger support. And then I already talked a bit about Briar here in the support Briar got in the form of premeditate and give and take. So already a lot of support there. Nothing really support-wise at all for these top decks in S tier, but they didn't need it. They were already kings of the meta. As far as I can tell, they didn't really get anything. But like I said, they weren't worried about that. I mean, there's already been repeated bans into both of these heroes. Hypothermia banned, Winter's Whale banned, this and that banned. Everything's just being taken away, and they're still so strong just because Channel Lake Frigid is strong, Blizzard is strong, Storm Striders is strong, Rampart is strong. Like, everything they have is super strong. And so they're in a good spot still. Like, they didn't really get support, but they didn't need it. They're still going to beat up on basically all the other decks in the meta. They're just going to lose to some of the setup decks like Dromai here, and then to a lesser extent Dash. But this is where I see the meta right now. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. What are you playing the first week? I'm going to be rocking Katsu probably. He was one of my first heroes, and I'm excited that he seems so much stronger now. But I'll probably be putting out a Katsu deck tech later this week. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.